Welcome to Folklore, a place where ancient rituals are not just remembered, they are reawakened. Where bloodline curses whisper through the wind, and forgotten villages sleep beneath centuries of silence, waiting for someone to come too close. Here, we don't tell stories, we unearth them. Stories buried under temple ruins, sealed behind rusted doors, hidden inside cracked bells that ring when no one is near. Stories passed down in murmurs, in red-threaded scrolls, in the mouths of those too afraid to speak their names aloud. Tonight, you will hear one such tale. It begins with a bell that weeps blood. It hung in a mountain shrine, deep in a village long erased from maps, where every daughter of a cursed family was promised to a ghost in marriage, and where one girl tried to run from fate. She failed, and the bell has been ringing ever since. This is the story of the Crimson Bell of Yao Village, a story of betrayal, of forbidden rites, and of the price paid when the dead are not done with the living. Now, listen closely, because once the bell tolls for you, it does not stop. They arrived just before the rain. The path to Yao Village was barely a path at all anymore, just a ghost of stone beneath choking roots and half-buried shrine markers, their Taoist inscriptions long worn down to bone-like smudges. The trees had reclaimed everything. Bamboo shot up like spears, wild fig trees twisted through the remnants of stone walls, and thick vines reached like fingers from the forest floor, warning the living not to proceed. But they came anyway. 5 of them, spiritual researchers, though the word felt too academic for what they were chasing. They were not mere historians or anthropologists. They sought stories that breathed, the kind told in dying dialects, scrawled in forgotten temple scrolls, or locked behind ancestral doors that had remained sealed not out of neglect, but out of fear. Lean was their lead, calm, quiet, always listening more than speaking. She had found the mention of Yao Village in a borderland monastery library, written in a margin in faded red ink. Bell that cries blood, marriage of silence, forbidden rites. That was all. No location, no map, just a footnote beside a poem about filial duty. But something about it had taken hold of her. A thread pulled tight in her chest, and when they finally pieced together the old trade routes and matched them to a decaying satellite map, she'd known. She couldn't explain how, only that she knew, where the bell waited. They stepped into the village at dusk, what was left of it. There were no rooftops anymore, only rotted beams buried beneath moss. No paths, only outlines of where they had once been. A rusted gate leaned sideways at the village entrance, its talismans shredded by weather, still faintly red. The air carried that hollow stillness found in places long abandoned, not peaceful, but paused, as if time itself had stopped mid-breath. It was men who first saw the temple. Perched above the village on a small rise, the old shrine sat beneath a canopy of black pines. Its wooden pillars had decayed, and the roof sagged like a broken spine, but it still stood, still watching. "Someone's cared for this," Men murmured, brushing his hand across a column. Lean didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the bell. It hung at the front of the shrine, suspended by rotting hemp rope. Made of bronze, but darkened by time, the bell was massive, nearly the size of a coffin. Cracks spidered down its side. Its base was stained, not with rust, but something deeper, more organic, a dark maroon smear crusted thick along the rim. Blood, they whispered, though none of them dared to say it out loud. They set up camp at the edge of the village. By firelight, they took notes, photographed the ruins, sketched the altar stones and the strange carvings half swallowed by roots. One looked like a woman in robes, head bowed, her mouth missing. Another showed a skeletal figure with a crown, standing behind a bell that leaked something onto the earth. Yang, their documentarian, tried to joke about it. "Good thing I'm not a firstborn daughter," he said, elbowing Lin playfully. She smiled thinly. She was. That night, it began. The bell rang. Once. Low and deep, the sound didn't echo. It absorbed, as though the forest inhaled it. None of them admitted to hearing it, but they did. Their eyes met in the dark. No wind had blown, no animal had stirred. The bell had rung on its own, and something woke beneath the earth. The second day brought the rain. A heavy mist rolled down from the mountains, soaking their tents and clouding their breath. The shrine looked darker in the gray, older, hungrier. Inside they found more carvings, hidden behind rotting panels and beneath old offerings wrapped in red silk. One panel showed a bride in red robes, standing beneath the bell. Her mouth was stitched shut. Red thread was drawn in long looping lines from her lips down to her chest. She wore no eyes. "Ghost marriage," we whispered, the youngest of them. "My grandmother told me about these. When a woman dies unmarried, sometimes they wed her to a spirit so she won't wander." "This one isn't dead," Lin replied quietly. They all turned to her. "She's alive in this carving," she explained, tracing the lines of the girl's feet, planted, not floating. Yang raised a brow. "Then this was a living bride?" Lin nodded slowly. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the carving, and for the briefest moment, she thought she heard something. A whisper, not in her ears, but inside her, behind the ribs, a woman's breath, desperate, choked. She pulled her hand back. Later that night, men disappeared. They searched for hours, through the brush, into the shrine, down the slope toward what had once been rice terraces. Nothing. No prints, no signs, only the faintest trail of red dread caught in the thorns by the forest's edge. The bell did not ring that night, but no one slept. By morning, Yang wanted to leave. "We've got enough. Photos, samples, audio. Let's go. Min's probably on a road back to the village down the mountain." Lin didn't argue, but she didn't pack either. She was drawn to the shrine again, this time alone. Inside, the altar was different. It had been swept clean. The red silk offerings were gone. In their place, someone had placed a pair of red bridal shoes, old and crumbling, yet untouched by rot. She stared at them, heart stuttering. Behind her, the bell rang. Once. Slow. Wet. She turned toward the sound. Blood dripped from its crack. Just a single drop, sliding down the bronze and falling to the stone like a teardrop. It vanished the moment it struck the ground, but the image was burned into her mind. She stepped toward it, reached out, and then a voice. Not from the bell, not from behind her, but inside her. It said her name. Not Lin, her real name. The one her grandmother had whispered on her deathbed. The name from the old family register that her mother had burned after fleeing the province. A name that no one living should have remembered. The voice said it with hunger, with claim. And the moment she heard it, the air changed. It was no longer just rain and wind. The village had shifted, not physically, but spiritually. The boundary between now and then, between flesh and ritual, had thinned. Lean stepped away from the bell, but the sound echoed inside her bones. When she returned to camp, Yang was gone too. Only his camera remained, lens cracked, red thread wrapped tightly around it like a warning. We and the others looked to her. "Something's wrong," he whispered. Lean said nothing, but deep down she knew. They hadn't found Yao village. It had found her. And the bell wasn't crying blood. It was calling for a bride. The forest no longer felt like forest. It felt like lungs, breathing, slow and heavy. Every step Leon took was muffled, as if the ground itself was wrapped in something unseen. Not quite mist, not quite shadow, but a presence, watching, waiting. Only 3 of them remained now. Leon, Wei, the youngest, now pale with fear, but still trailing her like a child afraid to be left alone, and Zhen, their equipment technician, quiet and skeptical until the moment Yang vanished. Now she said little, but her eyes never left the trees. They had waited all morning, hoping Yang would return. He didn't. By noon, the sun had vanished behind a ceiling of low gray clouds that refused to break. The village felt submerged, like they were walking through the bottom of a drained lake. Nothing made sound. Even the insects had stopped. Leon led them back to the shrine. It had changed again. There was no wind, no breeze, and yet the Chochin lanterns hanging under the roof beams swayed faintly. Their paper was tattered, their red ink faded, but the shape was unmistakable. Each bore the character for marriage. Zhen looked around. These weren't here yesterday. They were always here, Leon said softly. She didn't know why she said that, only that it felt true. Wei stepped closer to the altar and froze. His breath hitched. What is that? Leon followed his gaze. The back wall of the shrine had shifted. A panel of old cedar now pushed slightly open, revealing a hidden alcove behind it. Inside, half shielded by rot and shadow, was a mural, older than anything else they'd found. It showed a woman in full wedding attire, red robes embroidered with gold thread, phoenix motifs spiraling around her sleeves. But her face was blank. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Only a flat, smooth expanse of faded skin paint. What chilled them was not just her facelessness. It was her stance. She stood beneath the very same bell that hung above them now, her arms gently at her sides. But the bell in the mural was not whole. It was cracked and bleeding from the same place the real bell had wept the night before. Below the woman's feet were smaller figures, men with scrolls, incense burners, ritual knives, Taoist robes. One held a long red thread stretched tight between his hands, looped like a noose. And below that, carved smaller still, a skeleton with a crown, seated atop a mound of red-dyed skulls. Its mouth open wide as if screaming, though no sound came from the painting. Zhen raised her phone to take a photo, but the screen went black. "Battery's full," she muttered, tapping it. "It just won't turn on." Leon stepped closer. The mural seemed to shift as she approached, the reds deepening, the faceless bride tilting slightly. There was writing below the scene, an old dialect, barely legible through grime and rot. Wei leaned closer. "Can you read it?" Leon hesitated, then slowly began to speak. "Bound not in life, but in blood. She walks the earth in silence, the bride whose name cannot be spoken. The bell rings not for prayer, it rings for her return." A cold gust swept through the shrine as she finished, though the air outside remained still. Zhen turned slowly. "That's not a ghost story, that's a threat." They returned to camp with the unease trailing behind them like smoke. Wei kept looking over his shoulder. "What does it mean that her name can't be spoken?" "It means she's still listening," Zhen said under her breath. That night, Leon sat awake, staring at the bell from the edge of camp. It was just barely visible through the trees, a dark shape above the village, unmoving but aware. She remembered the voice from the day before, how it had spoken her secret name. She hadn't told anyone that name, not even her mother. Her grandmother had whispered it once when Leon was 5, a strange name, not Mandarin, not Cantonese, not any dialect she knew, but it echoed in her skull when the bell rang, and she knew now it belonged to this place. Somewhere in her veins, this village ran. And that bride with no mouth, no name, she was not a myth, she was a warning. Wade disappeared just before dawn. His bedroll was still warm, his boots gone. No sign of struggle, no blood, just a single red thread tied around the zipper of his backpack. Tight, deliberate. Zhen didn't speak for nearly an hour. Then finally, "We need to burn it. The bell, the shrine, everything." Leon shook her head. "You can't burn what's already cursed." Zhen turned sharply. "You knew, didn't you, that something would happen here?" "I didn't know, but I felt it. The moment I read the name Yao." I paused. "My mother was born here." Zhen paled. "You never said that." "She never told me," she replied. "Not until right before she died. She made me promise never to go looking, that some doors should remain shut." Zhen stared at her. "Why didn't you listen?" Leon looked toward the bell. "Because some promises pull harder than fear." Later that afternoon, Zhen left. She didn't say goodbye. She just packed what she could and started down the broken path out of the village, muttering curses and prayers under her breath. Leon didn't try to stop her. She returned to the shrine instead. The mural had changed again. The faceless bride now had eyes, not painted, but real, pasted into the wall like offerings, black and unblinking. The red thread once held by the Taoist priest now wound around the bride's wrists. And on the floor before the painting, set neatly in a cracked ceramic bowl, was a clump of long black hair. Zhen's. Leon dropped the bowl. The ceramic shattered across the stones. And in the silence that followed, the bell rang. Once. Low. Final. Like a tomb being sealed. Blood slid down the crack in the bronze once more, but this time, it didn't vanish. It pooled. The blood did not dry. It spread slowly, a dark vein against the cold temple stone, inching toward Leon's feet like it was seeking something or someone. She stepped back, heart pounding, breath catching in her throat. The air around her had changed, not colder, not heavier, but aware. The shrine no longer felt abandoned. It felt occupied, and not just by memory, by intent, by presence. She left without touching anything, but something followed her out. That night, Lian sat alone at the campfire, the silence so deep it swallowed the crackling wood. The village was still, no wind, no birds, no insects, just the trees, looming like silent monks, bearing witness. She didn't know what time it was when the monk arrived. He did not make a sound, no footfalls, no rustle. He simply stood at the edge of the firelight, his long robe soaked from mountain mist, his broad-brimmed hat shadowing his face. But Lian felt no fear, only inevitability. "You are not supposed to be here," he said, voice low and dry like old paper. Lian rose slowly. "Then why are you?" "I am the last one who remembers what this place truly was." His hands were clasped, sleeves covering them entirely. "And I come each year to ensure it remains forgotten." He stepped closer, and Lian saw that his robe was embroidered, not with dragons or clouds, but with protective sigils stitched in black thread. Dozens of them, as if he wore not a garment, but a barrier. "I've read the legends," she said. "No, you've read the lies written after the curse began. The truth was buried along with the bride." He stared at her for a long moment. "And yet you came. Why?" She hesitated. "My mother was born here. She changed her name, burned all records. She told me to never come back." The monk lowered his head. "Then she remembered. She survived the choosing." "Choosing?" He nodded. "Each generation, one daughter, firstborn, always a girl, chosen by the bell." Lian's voice cracked. "For what?" He looked up at her, and his eyes were sharp as blades. "For marriage." They sat by the fire as dawn crept in behind the trees. The monk spoke slowly, as if the words cost him something. "Long ago, Yao village was rich. Rice flowed from its fields. Children were never sick, and no outsider dared cross its borders, not because of protection, but because of the pact. A warlord had once ruled these lands centuries ago, cruel, ambitious, feared. Before he was betrayed by his own kin and burned alive in his fortress, he swore a curse upon the blood that turned against him, a curse that would bind their daughters to him in death. His followers gathered his ashes, mixed them into molten bronze, and forged a bell. Inside it, they placed a lock of his hair, a fragment of bone, and a thread soaked in the blood of his youngest wife, who had taken her life upon his pyre. The bell was hung above a shrine built from black pines, and every generation a girl from the bloodline was chosen, not to die, but to marry, alive, buried beneath the shrine, sealed behind red silk and silence, her name struck from records, her mouth sewn shut so her screams would not wake the village. It was called the Crimson Vow. Some called it protection, others called it penance, but it was always a prison. And the bell, it is not an object, it is him." Lian sat in stillness. "And if a bride refuses?" "She never returns, and the village pays the price." She looked up slowly. "Then what happens if there are no more daughters?" The monk's voice dropped. "Then the bell rings louder." He told her the final ritual had failed. The last chosen bride, decades ago, tried to escape with a Taoist apprentice, a boy who believed he could sever the curse using forbidden rites. But love is not stronger than blood, and the bell demands what it was promised. The ritual failed, the bride was lost, and the warlord's spirit grew restless. The village began to vanish, not at once, but piece by piece. Children born still, animals refusing to enter the forest, and people walking into the forest and never returning. The curse had matured into hunger. That's why the villagers abandoned it. But one bloodline survived, hidden, renamed, and now the bell had found it again. "You are the last one," he said, voice heavy. "It will not stop calling." She stared into the fire. "Then why did you let me come?" "I didn't. It called you, just as it called me to witness. But you must leave. If you stay, it will finish what it began." She looked at him with hollow eyes. "I've already stayed too long." When Leon returned to the shrine the next day, the air was colder. The trees were wet with dew, but not from rain. The forest had sweat, the way skin does before a fever breaks. She stepped into the shrine and felt the bell hum, not with sound, but with memory. It remembered her, and she, God help her, remembered it, in flashes, not dreams, not visions, recollections. Lying in red silk, face covered in powder, red thread pressed to her lips, a priest's voice chanting above her, the bell swinging slowly, blood seeping through the floor, and her mother watching from behind the curtain. She gasped, stumbling back. The memory vanished like mist. But something was changing. The mural bride now had not just eyes, but lips, stitched shut with real red thread, and the thread ran downward, out of the wall and across the floor, right to the bell, tied around its cracked base as though trying to hold it closed. But the knot was loosening. She reached out to touch it. The bell pulsed and whispered, "Your name is not yours. Your mouth is not yours. Your breath was promised, and promises must be kept." She fell backward, the voice slithering through her skull, and then the bell rang. Not once, but 3 times. Low, wet, like lungs exhaling blood. Behind her, the wind returned. With it, a sound she had not heard in days. Footsteps. But when she turned, no one was there. Only a long, fresh red thread, trailing through the forest and disappearing into the earth. The earth was no longer still. It breathed in slow, shallow pulses that throbbed beneath Leon's feet as she stood once more before the shrine. The wind had returned, but it didn't move like wind. It circled the bell in uneven gusts, spinning the faded Chochin lanterns that hung above her like mourners in red. The crack in the bell had widened overnight. Blood no longer seeped in slow tears. It dripped, steady, rhythmic, one drop at a time, pooling beneath the bell's rim as if marking time, like a countdown or a heartbeat. Leon stared at it for a long moment, then turned her gaze to the altar floor. The red thread she had seen yesterday was gone, but something else had shifted. The stone beneath the altar was worn in a pattern she hadn't noticed before. A circle, scratched by hand. She knelt and ran her fingers along the edges, fine etchings, too shallow for tools, like they had been carved with fingernails. She pressed down gently and felt it move. A quiet click echoed beneath her knees. The stone shifted, just barely, and with a faint grinding sound, the center panel sank half an inch and slid to the side. A hidden stairwell opened beneath the shrine. Air exhaled from below, wet, stale, not rotted, but old, like something had been sealed there for generations. Leon hesitated, then lit her lantern and descended. The stairwell was narrow, hewn from earth and stone, the steps uneven and damp. Red thread hung from the ceiling in long strands, some knotted, others torn and dangling like veins. The deeper she went, the louder she heard it. Breathing. Not hers, not human. The sound didn't come from a direction. It came from the walls, as if the very soil had lungs, and the shrine above it was resting atop something that was not entirely dead. At the base of the stairs, she found the chamber. It was small, circular, carved in the shape of a womb. The walls were smooth, lined with crumbling cloth faded from red to black. Incense ash covered the floor in thin waves, and in the center sat a coffin, open. Not a box, not even wood. Stone. A sarcophagus, bound in red rope, sealed with rusted nails and crushed bone dust. The lid was cracked. A narrow split ran across the top, as if something inside had pushed against it. Her lantern flickered, and inside the crack, an eye stared up at her. Glass, not alive, but once human. She staggered back, nearly dropping the light. Inside the sarcophagus, pressed beneath layers of red silk and thread, lay a body, still clothed in a wedding robe, mouth sewn shut, hair braided in the old Yao style, long and lacquered, still glossy despite the decay. A comb was buried in the strands, carved bone, shaped like a bell. The woman's hands were crossed over her chest, bound at the wrists with red thread. Around her neck hung a pendant, black jade, inscribed with the same character that was on the lanterns above. Marriage. Leon felt bile rise in her throat. She looked closer. The hands, though skeletal, bore calluses, tiny scars. Not the hands of a noble bride. These were hands that had worked, that had resisted, that had tried to escape. The coffin walls were scratched from within, claw marks, dozens of them. Leon backed away, shaking, and then she heard her name. Not spoken, sung. A lullaby, ancient, off-key, sung in a voice too old to be remembered, but too familiar to forget. It wound its way around her thoughts, pulling at something buried deep inside her. A memory she didn't own, a scream she'd never screamed, a wedding she'd never agreed to, yet somehow remembered. She turned and fled. The shrine above was no longer empty. As Leon emerged, the world had shifted again. The altar was alight with candles, dozens of them, though no one had lit them. Red wax dripped down onto bowls of dried rice, wilted lotus petals, and burned incense curled into the shape of characters she could not read. The mural behind the altar now showed two figures, the bride, still faceless, still red-robed, and beside her, the warlord. He was only partially revealed, shadowed in black ink, but his presence dominated the painting. A towering man with a blade slung across his back, his hands clawed, his crown twisted, his face wrong, unfinished, like it refused to be captured fully on the wall. His eyes were hollow, blackened pits, and from them ran trails of blood that soaked the bride's robes. The bell above them had changed too, no longer cracked. It was wide open, split entirely down the middle, like jaws pouring blood across the mural. And at the bride's feet, newly painted, was Leon's name, her real name, written in bold black ink, not on the wall, but scrawled across the stone floor in front of the altar, as if something had been waiting for her to find it, and was now ready to take her back. She ran out of the shrine, into the village, through the trees, her breath sharp and hot, chest aching with every step. The world around her spun, the forest narrowing into a tunnel of mist and red leaves. She fell once, caught herself, and kept running, until she collapsed beside the old boundary marker at the edge of Yao village. It was still there, still carved with faded Taoist sigils meant to keep spirits in, not out. She reached for her satchel, fumbling through notes, maps, anything to anchor her. Her fingers brushed against her grandmother's old prayer beads, the ones she had kept hidden since the funeral. The string snapped, the beads scattered, and from the last bead a strip of old parchment fell, wrapped tightly, hidden inside for years. She unrolled it with shaking fingers. It was a name, her name, and beneath it, in her grandmother's fragile handwriting, "I was not the first to run, but you must be the last to return. If you see the bride, do not speak. If you hear the bell, do not answer. And if you remember her face, it is already too late." The trees whispered then, not wind, voices, chanting, soft and rhythmic, layered with bells and breath and the rustle of silk. The same sounds that once haunted ritual halls now echoed across the bones of Yao village like smoke over coals. She turned back toward the shrine. It stood illuminated, waiting, and deep below, in the womb beneath the altar, something had opened its eyes again. The bell no longer waited. It breathed. By the time Leon returned to camp, the air around the village had changed from a muted silence to a low hum, as if the earth itself had swallowed a chant and was vibrating with it. Every surface seemed to carry the pulse, the trunks of the black pines, the moss-coated stones, the very air trembling faintly as if holding back an echo. There was no one left at camp. Zhen's gear lay scattered where she had dropped it, a trail of crushed incense sticks leading toward the shrine. Leon called her name once. The sound went nowhere. It was swallowed by the mist before it could bounce back. Her phone screen was black. The lantern she carried flickered, dimming and brightening in odd rhythms, not dying, but breathing. She thought of the sarcophagus below the shrine, of the claw marks on the stone, of the pendant carved with the character for marriage. She thought of her grandmother's hidden note, and she understood something terrible. She wasn't simply visiting a cursed place. She was walking into an unfinished ritual, and it had been waiting for her. That night she didn't try to sleep. She sat against the old boundary marker at the edge of Yao village, holding the beads of her grandmother's broken rosary, staring at the shrine through the mist. The bell hung motionless, but somehow restless, its split mouth glistening as if wet. At midnight, it rang. Not the deep toll of a temple bell, something slower, wetter, a sound like metal dragging across bone. The tone moved through the mist and into her chest. She felt it not in her ears, but behind her ribs, a vibration threading through her heartbeat. With it came a smell. Iron and lotus blossoms, old blood mixed with funeral incense. The mist around the shrine thickened until it shaped itself into corridors. She could see them, phantom hallways leading down, lined with paper charms fluttering, though there was no wind. Red threads stretched across the corridors like tripwires. And somewhere down those impossible halls, a woman was walking. Leon saw her as if in a dream, red robes trailing like spilled paint, hair braided and heavy with combs, mouth sewn shut. She did not float like a ghost. She walked, each step deliberate, her head tilted as if listening for a voice, as if listening for Leon. The bride turned toward her across the distance, though no eyes showed beneath the white powder on her face. Leon gasped and shut her eyes. When she opened them, the corridors were gone, but the smell remained, and the bell was still ringing inside her bones. By dawn, the village had changed again. Where once there were only foundations and moss, faint outlines of houses now rose from the ground like shadows at low tide, black silhouettes of walls and roofs, shimmering as though reflected on water. Doorways without doors, windows without glass. For a moment, she heard voices inside them, women's laughter, children's games, the sound of rice being washed. Then it faded. Only one thing was solid: the shrine. It loomed larger now, though she hadn't moved closer. The steps had multiplied, stretching downward in a steep stair that had not been there the day before. The altar candles burned even in daylight, their wax running down onto bowls of fresh rice. And above them, the bell swayed, not from wind, from breath. Leon stepped toward it before she realized she was moving. Each step felt like walking through water. She could hear chanting again, faint like a chorus from behind walls. She stopped at the base of the steps. A figure stood at the top. Jeanne, or what had been Jeanne. She wore a tattered red robe over her hiking clothes, her hair unbound and streaked with ash. Her eyes were open, but unseeing, her lips moving as though murmuring a prayer. Red thread trailed from the corners of her mouth, winding down her neck like veins. "Jeanne!" Leon cried. Jeanne turned her head slowly. Her mouth opened wider. The thread pulled taut, and then she stepped backward into the shrine and was gone. Leon climbed. The stairs seemed endless. Each step echoed, though no sound returned. The shrine's interior glowed red, as if lit by coals. The mural had changed yet again. Now the bride's faceless head tilted back, mouth unstitched, and black smoke poured into the bell above. And on the altar lay Jeanne's camera. She picked it up with trembling hands. The screen flickered to life. It showed a recording of Jeanne standing exactly where Leon now stood, looking at the altar, whispering in a voice that wasn't hers. She must return. The bell must be fed. Bloodline must be bound. The bride must be chosen. Then the screen went black, and the bell rang again. This time the sound did echo, but not outward. It echoed backwards, drawing her into itself. For an instant, she saw not the shrine, but a courtyard from centuries ago. Banners hung with characters for longevity and union, a crowd of villagers in red, a warlord's banner overhead. She stood at the center, dressed as a bride, hands bound, mouth sewn shut.
the warlord's spirit beside her, a tall shadow whose crown was made of bones. The bell swung above them, dripping red wax onto her hair like blessings. She felt her lips move beneath the stitches. And then the vision snapped. She was back in the shrine, but she was no longer alone. The bride stood at the altar across from her. Real, three-dimensional, face still blurred, mouth still stitched, hair heavy with combs. She raised her hand slowly, palm outward, not threatening, inviting. Her knees buckled. She dropped the camera. It shattered on the stone. The bride took one step closer and whispered through her sewn lips, "You have come home." The bell rang one last time, and every candle in the shrine went out.
She woke with blood in her mouth. Warm, metallic, thick across her tongue, not from injury, but as though something inside her had ruptured in the night. Leanne sat up, coughing into her hands. The blood was dark, not bright red, but brownish, like old rust, like the stain on the bell. She blinked hard, but the campfire was gone. So was the camp. She was lying inside the shrine, alone. The mural above her had changed again. Now it showed a wedding. The faceless bride, no longer bound, her lips parted slightly, standing beside a tall figure in black and red. The warlord. His face still hidden, but his presence now undeniable. He stood with his arm around the bride's shoulders, smoke rising from his body as if he were made of burning incense ash. And from the bell above them, a long red thread stretched downward into the bride's mouth. Leanne staggered to her feet. The walls of the shrine seemed to pulse with heat, though no fire burned. Her vision swam. Her head throbbed in time with her heartbeat. Something was wrong with her, not sick, not poisoned, but claimed. She stumbled outside, and the world was different again. The village had returned. Not the ruins, the village. Whole, alive. Roofs stood intact, windows shuttered, gardens overgrown but vibrant. The old rice terraces shimmered with ghost water under gray skies. Red banners hung between the homes, bearing calligraphy for union, abundance, and peace. People moved in the distance, not quite human, not quite shadow, echoes. Villagers in ancient garb sweeping steps, tending fires, preparing for a ceremony. Their faces were featureless, smooth and indistinct, but their motions were rhythmic, practiced, like they had done this before, over and over, for centuries. Leanne turned in place. She was not in the present anymore. She had stepped into the memory of Yao, but something in that memory had noticed her. He came that night, not through a door, through her dreams. She slept fitfully beneath the broken rafters of an abandoned home, trying to escape the endless ringing of the bell, but he found her anyway, as smoke first. It seeped from the floorboards, curling into shapes around her, warm and whispering. Then came the voice, low, velvet, tearing through her thoughts. "You came back. You were always meant to return. I waited. I burned, but your blood remembered me." She saw him, first in flashes, then in whole. A man once regal, now reduced to ash and vengeance. His skin was blackened in places, as if fire had licked him for centuries. His robes were ceremonial, embroidered with symbols of power and conquest, but his crown was made of bone. He didn't walk, he unfolded. Rising out of the darkness, his shape coiling into incense smoke, into the outline of a man. Where his eyes should have been 2 pits of hot coal, and where his heart should have been a bell cracked down the center. She tried to scream, but her lips were sewn shut. Not literally, but spiritually. She could feel the thread, not on her face, but in her soul, drawn tight and red, pulling her toward him. He reached out with hands of fireless flame. You were promised. Your line betrayed me, but you came willingly. She shook her head, tears burning. Not willingly, he whispered, but inevitably. She woke choking on ash, real ash. Her throat burned, her skin stung. The shrine loomed again outside the home, its bell swinging slowly, even without wind. The red thread now coiled through the village, stretching from house to house like veins across skin. She followed it, not by choice, by pull. Her feet knew the way, even if her mind rebelled. Each step drained something from her. Her memories blurred, her mother's face, her grandmother's hands, even her own voice. It all began to fade as though overwritten by something older, deeper, by a vow made centuries ago. She reached the shrine by nightfall. The bell tolled as she stepped inside. This time, she heard words in the sound. She has returned. The union may begin. The bride is ready. The groom awaits. Leanne dropped to her knees, not in prayer, in surrender. But even as the warlord's spirit drew close, heat swirling, ash tightening, something resisted. Not fear, memory. From deep inside her, a voice rose. Her grandmother's, soft, shaking, whispering over the clatter of rain and fire. You are not hers. You are not his. You are your own. Do not speak his name. Do not wear his thread. The memory struck like lightning. Leanne opened her eyes. The smoke swirled into fury, but she stood and screamed into the shrine, I was never yours! The bell shattered, not completely, just slightly. A fresh crack, running across the other, forming a cross. The smoke recoiled. The warlord's shape blurred, and for the first time since she arrived, the forest groaned as if the ritual had stuttered. Leanne collapsed. The bell rang again, but this time it stuttered too, like it had forgotten the words.
The crack in the bell did not heal. It pulsed, a slow rhythmic twitch of bronze, like something beneath its surface was still breathing, still growing, still waiting to finish what centuries had only begun. Every time it rang now, the sound carried a hesitation, as if even it was no longer sure who held the power, the curse or her. Leanne awoke on the shrine floor, red thread curled loosely around her ankles. She tore it off. The room was cold again, not in temperature, but in soul. The candles had gone out. The mural had faded back to its earlier form, but the presence remained, thinner, but not gone. And the bell still bled, just slower. She left the shrine, not to flee, to find answers. She searched the ruins of the village as morning broke, light filtering through a low gray sky. The phantom structures were fading again. The phantom people she had seen, their faces, their laughter, had vanished into the soil. But one building remained visible longer than the rest, the ancestral hall. Half swallowed by the earth, with pillars blackened by weather and time, the structure leaned heavily to one side. Red silk strips still clung to its beams, brittle with age, whispering with each breeze. She stepped inside. Dust blanketed the floor like snow. At the center stood a shrine table, collapsed in one corner, and on the back wall, half burned, but still legible, a family tree. Written in soot and ink, carved into rice paper with trembling strokes. At the very bottom, her grandmother's name, and above it, in faint red, Leon. But not as a descendant, as a chosen one. A single character next to her name, she, the vowed. Leon's breath caught. She reached for the scroll, her fingers brushing the paper's edge, and a whisper rushed through her ears like wind through dry leaves. Your blood remembered, even if your name did not. She turned. The monk stood at the doorway, soaked in mist, paler than before, but real. Still tethered to the present, though only barely. He sat with her as she stared at the scroll, neither of them speaking at first. Then he said, "Now you understand. You were never meant to discover this. You were meant to complete it." Leon turned to him. "Why didn't my grandmother tell me?" She tried, but words fail against memory. She ran from this place, changed her name, burned the records, but curses don't follow ink, they follow blood. He reached into his sleeve and pulled out a scroll thinner than the others. He unrolled it gently, revealing a diagram, a sigil of Taoist origin, complex, circular, centered on a single word, union. At the bottom were two names, the warlord's and hers. "I've seen the symbol before," Leon said softly. "On the altar, on the pendant." The monk nodded. "It is the binding rite, the marriage of silence. Once spoken by the priest, the bride is no longer of this world. She belongs to the spirit. Her voice is taken, her name erased, her breath a dowry." He paused. She was not always willing. Leon's voice broke. Who was she? He looked at her with pity. She was the first. The story came slow. Centuries ago, when the warlord was betrayed by his own kin, he died not in battle, but in ritual fire, burned alive by the people who had sworn loyalty to him in a rebellion led by his own cousin. But one person did not flee, his bride, a girl from the very family that turned against him. Bound to him by political arrangement, she was young, innocent, trapped in a marriage she did not choose. But on the night he was dragged into the fire, she refused to run. She stayed. She held a red thread soaked in her own blood and vowed to protect his name so his spirit would not be lost to the wind. She slit her mouth in mourning and died beneath the same bell now hanging above Leon's head. The villagers, desperate to stop his spirit from lashing out, took that final vow and replicated it. Year after year, generation after generation, a bride, a bell, a burial, until the curse became tradition and the tradition became sacred. They called it duty, the monk said bitterly, but it was sacrifice. Leon trembled. And I'm her? He nodded. You carry both bloodlines, the betrayer and the bride. That is why the curse ripens in you. It is why the bell calls you.
You are the completion, the perfect offering." She stood slowly, voice shaking. "Then I have no choice?" The monk's expression hardened. "Choice is an illusion for those born of oath." Leon left the hall in silence. The village was fading again, its ghosts slipping back into soil, the red thread vanishing from the trees. The shrine, however, remained vivid, as if it existed more fully than the rest of the world. She returned to it one last time that day, not to pray, not to run, to confront. She stepped inside and walked straight to the altar. The mural glowed faintly in the lantern light. The bride's face had returned to blankness. The warlord was gone. Only the bell remained, and under it, her name. This time, not painted, carved into the stone, fresh, still wet with blood. She placed her palm over it and whispered, "If I was promised, I promise nothing." The bell swung, but it did not ring. It listened. And from deep below the shrine, far beneath the floorboards, she heard something shift, stone on stone, chains unwinding. The coffin lid was moving.
It was no longer a dream, no longer memory, no longer vision. It was the ritual, awake again. That night, as the last of the village dissolved into mist and the trees swayed without wind, the red thread returned. No longer loose strands, but a net, a web that stretched across the shrine, across the forest floor, across the very ground beneath Leon's feet. It pulled, gently, patiently, and Leon followed. Not because she surrendered, but because she knew now running was part of the ritual too. That's how they lost the first bride. That's why it never ended. The true vow had never been spoken, not completely, not willingly. She stepped back into the shrine. The mural was gone. In its place was a mirror, ancient, tall, cracked through the center, not glass, but bronze, darkened by time. It didn't reflect the room, or the bell, or the candles. It reflected her, and something else behind her. The bride, standing just over Leon's shoulder, red robes, mouth sewn shut, head slightly tilted. Her face was no longer faceless. It was Leon's, but gaunter, paler, with the faint shimmer of ash upon her skin. She turned. No one stood behind her. She turned back. The reflection was still there. "You came," the mirror whispered, though its lips did not move. "You saw. You remembered. Now you must bind." The bell rang once, and the altar beneath it split. The stone cracked neatly down the center, and from the gap rose a scroll, tied in red silk, sealed with wax pressed by a thumbprint long decayed. Leon stepped forward and touched it. The moment she did, the shrine vanished. She stood in the past again, but not as a guest, as the bride. The wedding platform stretched before her, lacquered black wood lined with burning incense and mourning lanterns. Villagers knelt all around, heads bowed, no faces, just silence. And across from her, he stood, the groom, the warlord. Smoke poured from his sleeves, his crown of bones shimmered in the low light, his eyes, black coals, no longer angry but hungry. The red thread was already wrapped around their wrists, tying them together. But it had not been knotted, not yet. "Speak your vow," came the voice of the priest. "Bind the breath, seal the silence, give her name to the fire." Leon felt it now, what had always been missing. The original bride had refused. She had been loyal, obedient, but not willing. Her heart had remained unspoken. Her silence had been fear, not vow. And so the ritual had fractured, just enough to linger, just enough to curse. Leon looked across the thread. The warlord stared back. He raised his hand. The thread lifted. The bell swung. "Your name or your blood?" Leon opened her mouth, but no words came. Not yet, only memory. Her grandmother's hands on her cheeks, the smell of dumplings in winter, the sound of her mother crying after midnight, not knowing she was awake, the day she found the prayer beads hidden inside the cabinet, the shame of forgetting her own voice, the fear of remembering it. And then she said it. Not his name, hers. "I am not yours. I was never promised. I was never silent. I will never bind." The thread snapped. The platform shattered. The villagers screamed, not aloud, but in wind and ash. The warlord lunged, smoke twisting into blades and claws, but the bell exploded. The crack widened, split, and burst outward in a scream of blood and brass. The sound shattered the mirror, tore through the shrine, and sent the spirit back, not into the underworld, but into the void, unbound, unfed, unforgiven. Leon awoke in silence. The real shrine lay in ruins. The bell had fallen, split clean in two. The altar was scorched. Red thread was burned to ash. But she was alive and alone. Truly alone. The village was gone. The forest had reclaimed the land. And the ritual, unfinished for centuries, was now broken, not by blood, but by choice. Her choice, but at a cost. She felt it already. Her voice was hers, yes, but something else had gone. Some part of her, the one that remembered the laughter of the bride before her silence, remained in the mirror. She would never forget the feel of thread behind her lips. Nor would she forget the sound the bell made when it bled. The threads did not vanish. They scattered. Lean stood in the cold morning light, staring at the remains of the bell. It had not just cracked, it had collapsed, split wide open like a fruit long overripe. Its insides were hollow and dry, save for one final offering. A lock of black hair, curled like smoke, tied with red silk. Lean did not touch it. She understood now. Some remnants of vows cannot be buried. They must be carried. The village was gone. Not ruined. Gone. No roads, no stone outlines, no ancestral hall. The forest had closed over everything, like a wound healing over rot. Vines crawled where paths had once been. Bamboo bent where rooftops used to reach. Only the shrine remained, broken, smoking, but real. And the wind had returned, but it did not bring relief. It carried whispers, not in words,
in thread. Long strands of red fluttered in the trees, tied around branches, slipping from cracks in the bark, knotted through roots. Some floated freely, dancing like streamers caught in invisible hands. Lean followed one that wound its way through the woods. It led her to Wei. His body was kneeling, frozen in posture, eyes open, lips parted, but lifeless. Red thread stretched from his mouth down his neck, wrapped around his wrists, tied to the earth below like a marionette awaiting its puppeteer. She wanted to close his eyes, but they weren't truly his anymore. And when she turned, she saw Yang, then Zhen, then Min, each seated beneath trees, posed like statues, mouths sealed with red thread, bodies wrapped in patterns that mirrored the old wedding knot. They were not decaying. They were not dead in the usual way. They had been offered, but not accepted. And so they remained, unmoving, undone. Their souls not consumed, but held as warnings. The curse had been broken, but the warlord had taken what he could. She wept, silently. There were no tears left, only guilt, only red threads in the wind. That night she sat beneath the shrine's fallen beam, the shattered bell behind her like a coffin lid cracked open. Her hands were wrapped around the prayer beads her grandmother had left behind, half of them gone now, scattered in the forest like memories. The stars were clear, the moon was low, and for the first time since arriving, no spirits came. No visions, no bells, just the stillness of what remained. She felt hollow, not cursed, not haunted, but emptied. Not every victory comes with freedom. Some come with silence. In the days that followed, she buried what she could, not the bodies. They resisted decay and dirt alike, but the objects, the red thread, the combs, the pendant, the scrolls. She dug shallow graves with her bare hands, whispering not prayers, but apologies. When she returned to the shrine one final time, she found something new carved in the stone where the altar once stood. A single character, Fang. Release. Not in her hand, not in the monk's, in no hand she recognized. But she understood. She had let go, and something had let her live. She left Yao village as the forest swallowed the last of its bones. No roads guided her, no signs remained. But the path opened anyway, as if the earth had been watching and knew she had earned her way out. She did not look back, not once. She knew the red threads would remain behind her, fluttering silently until the last wind died. But as she passed the old boundary marker at the edge of the world that was, she saw one final thread, tied gently to the stone. Thin, frayed, untouched by time. She took it, not to keep the past, but to remind herself that she was not the vow. She was the one who broke it.
The shrine was silent now, but the silence was not peace. It was memory, the kind that clung to walls and soaked into the grain of wood. the kind that waited until everyone else had left before it began to speak again. Leon returned on the 7th morning. The air was thin, the mist low, and the bell, shattered into 2 perfect halves, rested like broken wings atop the altar stones. She did not move them. She stepped over them, lantern in hand, and walked once more to the cracked panel behind the altar. The hidden stairway waited, still open, still breathing, as though something far beneath had been patient all along. She descended. The stairwell had changed, no longer narrow or crumbling. It was smooth now, clean, lined with red lacquer. The thread was gone, the ash gone, the smell of decay replaced by the faint scent of plum blossoms, like the ghost of springtime long past. She reached the bottom and gasped. The chamber was lit, not by fire, not by lantern, but by memory. The walls shimmered with faint carvings that glowed as she passed, revealing thousands of tiny figures, brides, row upon row, faceless, nameless, each stitched at the lips with loops of red ink. And at the center, the sarcophagus. But it was no longer sealed. Its lid had slid halfway aside. The silk within had been pulled back, carefully, reverently, as if by invisible hands, and lying within was her, the first bride, unmoving, yet not decayed. She was beautiful still, in the way a forgotten statue is beautiful. Hair long and lacquered, lips sewn with precise red thread, hands folded with jade prayer beads pressed between her palms. Her face was Leon's and yet not, a sister across lifetimes. Leon stepped closer, and the bride's eyes opened. They did not move, they did not blink, but they watched, not with fear, not with malice, but with grief. Leon fell to her knees beside the coffin. The air grew heavy, not oppressive, but intimate, as if the room itself had closed its eyes to give them privacy. And then, though her lips never moved, the bride spoke, inside Leon's mind. "I did not choose this. I was chosen. They burned my name. They praised my silence. But silence is not peace." Leon reached toward her. The thread across the bride's mouth pulsed once. "You remembered. And because you remembered, I can rest." Leon's hand trembled as it hovered over the first bride's folded fingers. The jade beads shimmered with warmth, as if worn by countless prayers never spoken aloud. The bride whispered, "They called it honor, but it was obedience. They said I preserved the village, but they buried me alive." The glow of the walls dimmed, the silence deepened, and in that stillness, Leon asked the question she had never dared. "Why didn't you scream?" The bride did not answer at first. Then, "Because I thought it would matter. Because I thought someone would hear me. Because I thought love would save me. But no one did. Until you." The red thread across her lips unraveled, softly, gently, not cut, not torn, but released, like breath after a long-held prayer. The bride's lips parted. She smiled, not with joy, but with freedom. And slowly, her body began to dissolve, not into ash, into light. Threads of golden mist lifted from her skin, unraveling her like silk caught in sunlight. Her form faded as the glow filled the chamber, and the jade beads fell from her hands into Leon's lap. Then came her final words,
You ended what I could not. You broke the vow. But remember this, curses do not die. They wait, in blood, in silence, in names. And then she was gone. Nothing left but the empty coffin and the beads. Leon wept without sound. She did not know how long she stayed, only that the light eventually faded and the chamber grew still, not haunted, not heavy, just quiet. She placed the beads over her wrist and stood. As she turned to leave, she looked back one last time, not to the coffin, but to the walls. And there, etched where the bride had once laid, a new carving had appeared. 2 names. One she recognized, one she didn't. And between them, no thread, only space, freedom. Leon climbed back to the world above. The sun had returned, the mist had lifted, and for the first time the shrine felt empty, not abandoned, not cursed, just, finally, done. She stepped outside, and as the wind moved through the trees, no threads danced in the air. Only the leaves, only the light, only her.
The air tasted of ash again, not the ash of fire, the ash of burnt paper, of prayers once offered and now refused. Leon knew the silence was not enough. The vow had been broken, the bride had been released, but the groom still waited, somewhere between death and eternity, unfed. The warlord had not faded, he had only been interrupted, and now he raged, not as smoke, but as storm. That night the wind turned violent. It ripped through the trees like cloth tearing along old seams. The forest cried out in hollow groans. Branches snapped, soil shifted, and from deep beneath the shrine the earth began to shake. Leon stood alone before it. The bell was gone, the thread gone, but the altar remained, cracked, waiting. She laid the jade prayer beads on the stone. She took out the scroll the monk had once shown her, the forbidden rite, the one used to seal the warlord's spirit into the bell long ago, the one never meant to be performed backwards, the ceremony of binding. But she wouldn't bind, she would break. She unfolded the scroll and began to reverse the chant. The shrine shuddered. The floor split open once more, but this time not to reveal the sarcophagus. Something climbed out. Smoke and bone, cloth and coal, a figure, half man, half memory. The warlord emerged with a roar not of voice, but of history, every broken promise and forgotten vow, screaming through him like wind through hollow drums. His face still hidden, his crown still bone, his hands blades of blackened fire. But this time he was afraid, because the ritual had changed. Leon stood before him, scroll in hand, jade beads glowing faintly at her wrist. The wind pulled at her hair, blood dripped from her nose, but her voice did not waver. You were bound by blood, now be severed by name. You were fed by silence, now starve in the truth. The altar erupted in flame, but it did not burn. It purified. The scroll vanished in light. The warlord screamed, a sound like glass breaking beneath centuries of dust. The walls of the shrine shook, shadows fled, the old murals peeled away, and the thread, what remained of it, burned in mid-air.
unraveling the last link. The warlord lunged, but found no flesh to claim, no name to bind, no vow to twist, only freedom. And he hated it. He exploded into ash. When the smoke cleared, the shrine was no more, only an open clearing, no altar, no bell, no trace. Only a single stone slab, flat and cold in the dirt, with an inscription newly carved, as if by an unseen hand. Here ends the vow. Here begins the silence. Leon knelt and placed her hand over the words. She did not cry, not because she wasn't sad, but because sadness was for what could be repaired, and this was finished. She walked back through the woods, the forest alive again, truly alive. Birds returned to the canopy, the soil smelled of moss and spring, the wind whispered only wind. But as she reached the ridge that once overlooked the village, she saw one final vision. The warlord's palace, now no longer looming and cursed, but crumbled, buried in vines, its flags fallen, its bones returned to earth, the place of betrayal gone. And standing at its steps, the first bride, not in red, but in white. Hair loose, face calm, eyes closed, no thread on her lips. She did not speak. She only bowed and vanished. Leon left Yao Mountain the next day. She carried no relics, no evidence, only the jade beads, worn now smooth at the edges, and one last memory, the sound of a bell that once cried blood, now silent, forever.
The mountain shook before the sun rose. It began deep underground, a tremor not of tectonic movement, but of memory splitting open. The earth beneath Yao had always hidden its shame well. It buried the brides, it sealed the vows, it swallowed the screams. But it could not hold the rage. And rage has roots. It breaks through eventually. Just like the bell. Leon felt it before she heard it, a pressure in her chest, a pulse behind her eyes, a taste, copper and dust, spreading across her tongue. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came, only a vibration, like the toll of a bell, distant, cracked, furious. It had no altar to cling to anymore, no shrine, no ritual, but it had her, and that was enough. The sky blackened without clouds, the air thickened without heat, the trees bowed inward, and from the ruins of the shrine's foundation something rose. It wasn't a man, it wasn't a ghost. It was the promise, broken and bleeding, a being formed of everything the warlord once was and everything he had become in death. Smoke, scorched armor, melted gold, fractured oaths, and the faces of the brides flickering across his chest like dying stars. His hands were blades, his mouth a furnace, his voice a bell. You cracked my name, you burned my thread, but you did not spill your blood. The earth split around her. Red light poured up from the cracks, the color of the thread, the robes, the ritual. It shimmered like liquid memory. He reached for her, not to kill, to complete, to take what he believed was still owed. Leon stood her ground. She had no altar now, no scroll, no bell, no priest, only the beads and her name, the true one, the one her grandmother whispered to her only once, tucked between bedtime stories and fear, a name passed down through silence, but never through surrender. She screamed it into the sky. The sound cut through the warlord like fire. The bell within his chest cracked again, louder this time, and from the split, blood poured. Not hers, his. Centuries of devoured breath, of stolen names, of silenced mouths, all bursting at once in a flood of molten memory. The forest trembled, the trees caught fire, not from flame, from truth. She stepped forward as he stumbled. The warlord, once immortal in wrath, now gasping as his form flickered. She placed the jade beads at his feet. You were betrayed, but you turned pain into prison. You turned memory into murder, and I end that now. She raised her hand, and the sky answered. The real bell, the first one, the original, unseen, buried under centuries of replication, rang. Not from above, from below. A sound that shook the roots of the mountain and the hearts of the dead. A final call, a death knell. And with it, the warlord shattered, not into ash, into names. Thousands of them. The lost brides, the silenced girls, the forgotten ancestors. Each name rising from his smoke like a spark. Each one spoken aloud by the wind. Each one free. And the blood returned to the soil, not to haunt, to heal. The cracks closed, the altar faded, the wind sighed, and then silence. True silence. The kind that doesn't hold its breath. The kind that means it's over. Leon fell to her knees, not in defeat, in release. The beads around her wrist glowed once more, then gently split apart, each one rolling into the dirt like a seed. She did not stop them. She let them go. And when she stood, she did not look back. The mountain did not tremble again. It had already exhaled. In the end, there was no monument, no shrine, no stele, no bell. Nothing to mark where Yao village had once been. Nothing to remember or warn. The forest closed over the clearing like a wound too old to scar. The bamboo swayed gently again. Birds returned, cautious at first. Even the sky seemed bluer, as if the clouds had finally forgotten the smell of blood. But beneath the soil, something still breathed. Not a curse, not a ghost, just memory. And memory never dies. Liane stood where the altar once rose. Her boots pressed into soft moss, the only sign that anything had ever been built here. Around her a hush stretched through the woods, not empty, not dead, just still, like the world had exhaled. The beads were gone, the scroll was gone, the warlord was gone, but she remained, changed, quiet, not with fear, but with knowing. She turned slowly in place, expecting perhaps to see the outline of a temple or hear the last toll of a bell, one final cry from history. But there was nothing. Only the breeze, only her own breath, only the sound of leaves brushing against themselves like whispers with no one left to listen. She found the old monk's hat resting at the base of a tree. It had not rotted, it had not moved, it simply waited. She sat beside it and placed her hand on the ground. The soil was warm, faintly, like breath long held finally reaching the surface. She closed her eyes and felt the past. Not as terror, not as guilt,
as witness. She had carried the vow to its end. Now she would carry the silence. Later, she walked back down the mountain path, the same one she had climbed what felt like lifetimes ago. No red thread trailed her heels, no phantom brides called from the trees. But at the edge of the forest, just where the land met the sky, she paused, because there, standing beneath the canopy, was the last thing she ever expected to see. A small bell, half buried in moss. Not bronze, not blood-stained. Ceramic, handcrafted, hung gently between two stones tied with white cloth. A chime. It rang softly in the breeze, a single, delicate note. Peaceful, human. She smiled, not because she was free, but because the land was. A year later, people would hike through those woods again. Some would comment on the strange quiet in that stretch of trail. Others would notice that no bird sang for nearly a mile. Most wouldn't think much of it, but some would feel it. The hush that pressed just beneath the surface of the wind, the odd weight in the trees, the moment of stillness where everything paused. And maybe, just maybe, they'd notice the little bell. Still ringing, still soft, still waiting for no one. It started with a sound, faint, delicate, like porcelain tapping gently against wind. A bell, but not one anyone remembered hanging. It rang once, then fell silent, then rang again, far away, down in the trees. No one knew where it came from, not exactly. Just that it came, every year, always on the same day. He was just a hiker, not a seeker, not a scholar, not a believer. He had no knowledge of rituals or bloodlines or villages buried by silence. He carried a new backpack, filtered water, and a phone with no signal. He came for the fresh air, the scenery, the stillness. He found all three. And something else. A bell, ceramic, chipped, barely larger than a teacup, hanging from a branch by a white ribbon. It swung in the breeze that wasn't there. It rang once, and he looked around, uneasy. No one. Nothing. Just trees, and wind, and silence. He took a photo. Nothing showed in it but blur. The bell looked wrong. Not cursed, not terrifying, just lonely. He turned to leave, and that's when he saw it. Tied to a tree just ahead, fluttering faintly, was a red thread. Thin, frayed, still tied in the old knot of union. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't understand the silence. He didn't hear the chanting. He didn't feel the eyes. Not yet. But the bell did. And it rang again, and again, and again. Far below the earth, deeper than roots, deeper than bones, a chamber, long thought empty, began to hum. A crack in the stone breathed warm. The soil shivered, and something blinked, not with eyes, but with memory. Because not all threads are burned. Some are buried. Some are waiting. And some Some still remember the name and remember the vow. Because in places forgotten by time, silence is not always the end. Sometimes it's only the pause before the bell rings again.